Hello, I'm Josh Kennedy. This is Annal-yze. I have a guest on today, and I've asked them to go through the annals of their music history to find a song that is special to them, something that is meaningful, maybe profound, so that we can dig in and talk about their experience with the music and my experience with the music as well. Today, we have our guest, David Hopkins. Hey, Dave, thanks for coming on.
Hey, happy to be here.
It's good to see you, man. It's been too long. We got to catch up a little bit before the taping and, talk about a lot of stuff that's really important to us. And that felt really special because we used to talk all the time.
Yeah.
We were really close back in, back in high school and right after high school. We hung out quite a lot.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I told Amanda earlier today that I was super excited just to get to talk to you. We've texted and stuff, but I hadn't seen your face and talked to you audibly. If that's a way to describe it.
Accurate, yeah.
Since over 10 years probably.
Shit, yeah, it's been like a decade. That's wild, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I concerning that also, I hope it's okay to talk about this here, but you're looking good, man. I know you've been training and getting into physical fitness and slimming up, man. You look good.
Thanks. Well, I've lost some weight. I've gained some weight back in the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have this mustache this morning. Well, I did have the mustache.
Wait a second.
It didn't just appear. I had a beard. I had a beard that was hiding a lot more of my fat face. And I went to trim earlier, trim it up before the show, and hit a patch a little bit more than I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, it'll be fine. I'll salvage it. But then I noticed that the sides weren't even. So I was like, all right, I got my guard out. I went to do it and I messed up both sides. And I was like, I have to shave off the entire thing. There's no way to trim this down. Yeah. And the moment the camera came on earlier, I was like, my face looks like one of those fat thumb soldiers from Spy Kids. Do you remember those things that would march around?
Oh my
so
God.
I appreciate you saying that because right now my self-esteem is not at an all-time high.
No, you're looking good, man. And I can relate, I've been up and down, and a lot of us have been up and down in weight in the pandemic, man. It's hard for everybody. But yeah, man, I had a weight loss journey after college too, and it's a struggle, but it's really important. So keep it up and I'll do the same.
All right, we'll do.
So let's get into it. What's your musical background? What did you grow up listening to? And if you perform or write music, let us know what kind of stuff you do there.
So growing up, it was, at the beginning, a lot of what my mom would listen to in the house. My dad wasn't and still really isn't super into, there's things that he likes, but he's definitely not the musical person in the family. And my sisters and I, all of the stuff that we got into, both in terms of listening and then also playing or singing or performing or whatever, came from my mom. So a lot of the music we would hear in the house would come from her. So it was a lot of stuff she listened to growing up. So bands like Bread and Jim Croce and Billy Joel, stuff like that. And her taste was pretty eclectic. It was, popular stuff that she grew up listening to, but then also whatever stuff that she was interested in that moment in time. So whether it would be some sort of to us kids growing up, obscure opera or whatever that she just happened to be interested in. So I wasn't necessarily super into that stuff, but it provided kind of a texture growing up of this was a thing that happened. We would hear different stuff in the house. And then getting older, once I had more of an identity and was starting to figure out what I liked, a lot of the early stuff I really loved was stuff that was popular at the time when I was growing up, really popular. So Britney Spears and boy bands, pop stuff that was really hitting big. And then I think in high school, I went through what I think I don't want to say most, but I feel like everyone I meet of our generation, it's the pop punk, the emo bands, that kind of stuff was huge.
Your but then I also your Fallout Boys, yeah.
Oh yeah, My Chemical Romance. I was really into them. So but there were also bands in high school, and you are actually someone who wouldn't apply to the next sentence I'm about to say, but there were bands that I would find and listen to where I would quickly realize none of my other friends like this stuff. Maybe they would know. But then it became a thing of okay, this is just music I listen to. Then it's not something I share with them. So you obviously, and in fact, I remember specifically in chemistry class one time talking to you about Dirty Harry by Gorillaz and how much you were into that. So I discovered, for me by myself, Gorillaz back then, Nine Inch Nails, which then ultimately ended up becoming my favorite band, and stuff that friends knew about but didn't necessarily care about. And then that kind of carried through college and discovering and starting to intentionally branch out and try to listen to more stuff. Like I always knew like hip hop and rap was a pretty big blind spot. And so in college, I was like, I'm going to check out this Kanye West fellow, and got super into Kanye and started to really appreciate, oh, okay, this is great. And I kind of wrote off this entire genre of music because I didn't really know anything about it. And then, yeah, it's continued to grow and change and evolve since then. I've talked to you recently. I never grew up being into metal, but like 4 or 5 years ago, I found a love for metal, and that's most of what I listen to now, probably.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I wondered, what was your entry point? What was the first band or song like in that genre that was like, oh, wow?
It was a band I still really like a lot. But it's funny now because now that I listen to them, I'm like, man, these guys aren't even really metal. Like they are, but back then I was like, oh my gosh, these guys are super hardcore, but it was Ghost. So they're,
okay. Yeah,
they're, hard rock.
Hard rock,
maybe.
yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. They have some of their earlier stuff's a little more doomy maybe, but for the most part, it's pretty soft. I still like them.
It's good. It's good stuff. Yeah.
Aesthetic and it's cool. But yeah, I distinctly remember like playing that we were painting my kid's bedroom. Amanda was pregnant with Daniel, and we were painting his bedroom, and I was listening to Ghost and being like, I think I could get into this, and sent out some feelers on social media of like, hey, I know I've got metalhead friends, like what do I check out next? And everyone immediately being like, how do we even answer that question? I'm like, I don't know. And then as I got more into metal, realizing, yeah, that is almost an impossible question to answer because there's a billion like subgenres. And but I fell into that in a big way because it's just insanely fascinating, the history just within that genre. And I know it's the case for pretty much every genre of music, but I never knew until I started really digging in, like, holy crap, there's so much history and texture and offshoots, and kind of trying to learn like, okay, which subgenres do I connect with? And yeah, I'm giving you a really long-winded answer. I'm sorry. I'm going to tighten this up.
No, please,
performance-wise,
that's what we're here for. That's what this is for, is because we want to hear these stories, because everybody has their own version of this story, and I think this is stuff everybody can relate to. And that's kind of why I do this show, is to give people the opportunity to be like, this is my experience with music, and this is how I relate to music. And I don't know, I think that's the interesting part. So but I did want to ask a specific question about the metal thing. You started with Ghost. It started softer. This is, and I don't want to bury the lead here a little bit, but so how thrashy do you like it? Like, how nasty do you get?
So I only recently have started to be able to dip my toes into like Cannibal Corpse level, like death
metal, grindcore,
death metal, which at the beginning I was like, oh, this is a subgenre I'll never like. Black metal was the same way, and
I thought the same thing about both of those subgenres, man.
Yeah,
I've
black metal maybe my top now. But yeah, death metal still now. Power Trip, I love Power Trip. Like that was such a bummer, and they're more just kind of like thrash, I guess. But finding out that their lead singer had died, I think it was last year, like super sad. And
bummer.
But so like that's probably the like hardest that I'm still kind of trying to get used to. But then there have always been exceptions to that. Like there's a Chinese black metal band called Black Kirin, I think is the name of it. But they mix like traditional old school like Chinese music, so like instruments, like a lot of like strings and different, with just like the blackest screaming crazy like black metal you can throw in there. And that has been something where I've been like, okay, I can latch onto something here. And then there have been other bands. Skeleton Witch's newest album I really liked. And that was one where at the beginning when I was into Ghost, I never would have been able to get past the screaming.
Yeah.
But now I listen to it on loop usually when I'm working. So
that's so cool, man. And that's kind of why I want to do this show, is because I think all of us have our blind spots, and I want to make the conversation about music less pretentious and more personal. That's why I wanted you on, because it's like, what was your journey? What did you connect with? So you've gotten really into metal recently, but your pick today is pretty far from that. So
pretty chill, yeah.
pretty chill. So tell us what's the song we're talking about today?
So the song's called "Awake" from the album of the same name by Tycho, and yeah, it's like it's synthy electronic. I got to it by way of when synthwave was like really becoming huge. Honestly, before it was even becoming what it kind of still is, because Drive had come out, and then
oh yeah, that blew the door open for so many people.
Yeah, when I was one of them.
Track by College, and it's just like,
oh yeah,
whoa, this is so cool.
Yeah, and I was absolutely one of those people. And then the Hotline Miami, the video game. Did you ever play that?
Yeah, I have.
So
I have the Hotline Miami 2 original soundtrack on vinyl.
Oh yeah,
the triple vinyl, like huge.
Yeah, no, it's great.
I love it so much. Yeah.
So both of those have fantastic music. The first one in particular was a game that for whatever reason it hasn't happened many times in my life, but I could probably count on one hand. There have been games where I've been like, I'm getting every trophy, I'm finding every secret, like I'm like just so dialed into it. And Hotline Miami was one of those games, and the soundtrack was a huge part of it. But it wasn't just, I mean, like it's not just like thumping bass and synthwave. Like there's a pretty decent mix of different styles in there, depending on like when you go into the shop, there's a theme, and when you go into the apartment, there's different sort of electronic ambient sort of thing. So I was branching out from there. So I was utilizing at work. At the time I had a day job, working full-time. Our main client was Apple, and was listening to stuff on Spotify while I would work, and would kind of branch off. So like Spotify has that feature where it's like, if you like this, people that like this band like these bands, and kind of trying to connect to other ones from a lot of the Hotline Miami bands. And so I came across Tycho, and Tycho, maybe some of their stuff would work in a Hotline Miami game, but it would have to be like a credit screen or something. Like it wouldn't be a pulse pounding like level where you're murdering people.
Yeah, that's part of the challenge that I came into, because if people who've watched the show before know, I like to make a recommendation for something to listen to. Part of the reason I had a lot of trouble this time, part of the reason is because Tycho stands apart from that synthwave stuff for some reasons that we'll get into in a bit. But yeah, so you were doing the Spotify recommends thing, which I did also to try to find a song to recommend based on this one to you.
Yeah.
So that's the song. That's how you found it. So what's your personal association with this song?
So I mentioned at the time I had a day job. So the other like key part of the story is that I have always been really into, and you've known this since you met me, into comic books. I grew up reading comics, was always a big comic book guy, but not just superhero stuff. Especially in high school, is really when it started branching out into everything and really seeing like, oh, this is an entire medium of all kinds of different stories. It's not just Spider-Man or Hulk or whatever. And finding stuff at the time like Blankets by Craig Thompson or Jimmy Corrigan by Chris Ware, and starting to kind of branch out and never wanting to do it as a creator, but just having a lot of passion for it and really loving the medium. That eventually changed. So in college, I started working on, I had a podcast, still do. It's not a weekly thing anymore, but we still do an episode every once in a while, with my best friend, Austin Wilson. We were like super connected into making podcasts. And at the time we were like, let's make a web comic too, to go with the podcast. And so we found an artist, and we needed a letterer. And for anyone who doesn't know, letterer in comics is the person who, the script shows up, the finalized like colored art shows up. The last piece to mix those things together is to add all of the sound effects, all of the word balloons, the dialogue. It's essentially the graphic designy kind of role in the team. And so I was like, this seems easy enough. I'll buy a book and teach myself how to do it. And I still have the book up there on the shelf, actually. And I started teaching myself how to letter, and pretty quickly was like, oh, I kind of love doing this. Like, it's a lot of fun. I had started to really notice lettering in comic books around that time, specifically in Hellboy, and Invincible, which is now a massive TV show on Amazon, which is crazy. And was like, I could see myself doing this. And I had this sort of like passion and drive in me of like, I want to learn how to do this better. And with every webcomic I letter, I want the next one to be better than the one before it. And that felt very strange to me because I'd always been someone who had a pretty decent work ethic that was instilled in me by my parents. But also I had the other half of me, which was like, find the fastest way to do it so you can be done with it to go home and not get in trouble for being a bad job.
Yeah, it's super.
Yeah.
But as I've started working more with music again, I am starting to get to that point that I think you're talking about, where you're like, oh, I actually want to get good at this. I actually give a shit about this product. So that's amazing. So how'd that get you? How'd that get you to this song?
So I started. Sorry, I know. Again, I'm long-winded. I'm trying to catch up to that point. I'm compressing years now, but got to the point where at that moment in time where I found this song, I was lettering at a level where I was getting paid. I wasn't making enough money to quit my job, but that was never in my head to do. It was just like, maybe dream scenario, someday I can work a part-time job at like Starbucks or whatever, and then the other half of my week I can letter comics and make enough money that I'm supporting not my family, but part of it, because Amanda would probably still have to work too, because comics isn't full of money. But I listened to an episode of Song Exploder, that podcast, and that they did over the song, and
I've heard it too.
Okay, so Scott Hansen, the main guy in Tycho, was talking about, for him, he was a graphic designer by day. That was his day job, and so all the art that you see there on the screen and the previous albums, he did all of that stuff, and music was the thing for him that essentially graphic design was for me. So I had almost mirrored thing. Yeah. It wasn't music for me, obviously, but and this album was this was the third Tycho album, I believe, and it was kind of the culmination of him arriving at a point where he was like, this is what I'm meant to do. Like, music is the shift. And so the album and the song, specifically Awake, is this feeling of, I'm awake. Like, this is who I am. This is me creatively. This is what I'm doing. And so, for obvious reasons, now that I explained a very convoluted backstory, that connected with me in a huge way, where it was like, I do feel that way about this thing, about lettering. And I've never felt that way about anything else I've been interested in my life. And if I can do it someday, that'd be great. But also that feeling of knowing that if I can't, I'm still going to letter. Like, I still have that fire, that passion in me to do it. And if the comic book industry collapses, I'm going to hit up some artists to draw something just so I can letter it. Like, I've got that fire in me to do it. So yeah, it connected. And so for a long time, it was almost this like creative anthem for me, where, because it's a song there's no lyrics. So, I'm stealing Scott Hansen's story to an extent, but that resonated with me so much. And then specifically, there's a point in the song, I think it shows up, I wrote it down at like the minute, let's see, I wrote it down somewhere, I don't know. There's a little melody. He talks about it specifically in it's at the 2 minutes and 54 second mark. There's a little melody that plays for the first time that he repeats a couple times, that in the podcast, at least, they juxtapose that with him talking about that feeling of being awake. So whenever I would hit that point in the song, that would always go through too. So that almost that melody itself became like the signifier. It's like the end of Close Encounters, where they play the keys or whatever, like the communication. Like, it was that creative thing. Yeah,
that's the message right there. One of those messages that come through. Yeah, I thought about that too when I was listening to this song. Listened to it a few times today. I was thinking, what is this song about? And it is always, it's a different experience to interpret a song without lyrics, but the title conveniently for this song says a lot. It's not some obscure or silly title. Like, it does seem to directly relate to the way I feel when I listen to this song. I had listened to that episode of Song Exploder, but I forgot that part of his story. And so when I was thinking about this, it did seem the thing that I kept coming to was the two elements were the rhythm section, because the bass carries the whole song. The bass is the spine of the song. It just sits there and thumps the whole time. It's steady, it's reliable, and it provides this sense of being grounded. While the synth lines, the keyboard, and the guitar feel like inquisitive, like they're searching for meaning. That's what I thought, was like, this is like an artist's search for meaning, because it feels like wholesome and grounded, but also curious, like it's searching for something. And that's what it feels like when in your life you suddenly come to some sort of realization,
Yeah.
where you're not confused anymore, but that curiosity remains. You're like, oh no, I'm grounded in this, and there's this higher vibration that's also trying to understand or find some meaning here. And I love that about this song. And I think that's one of the ways where it differs from a lot of synthwave stuff, is because it's a lot more grounded. And
Yeah.
I think his use of, like analog instruments, I think he's using like a real bass guitar there as opposed to like a synth button,
Well, that's I think a big distinction for this song and album in particular is this was the first album where he brought two or three more band members. Before it was just him. So
Okay.
I don't know how much stock people put into Pitchfork or whatever, but I remember in the Pitchfork review for the album, that was one of the things the writer there talked about a lot about, where it was like in the first two albums you can feel him sort of like, and the first two albums I think are great. I have since we're doing the vinyl thing, I have those on vinyl too.
Nice.
And also I didn't realize this until today. I completely forgot, but my placemat on my record player is the symbol on that album cover.
Oh, that's a great one.
Yeah.
I love that album art. It's really slick.
But yeah, he talks about how like the first two albums, Scott Hansen's kind of searching for what his sound is almost. He's like, you could hear him trying to find it.
Yeah.
And it's just him on his own, and there's a very natural progression that you can see. And then when he brings in more people and brings in the analog thing, his keys, like the synths and all that stuff, are still there and it's still very present, but it's a completely new level. And they've continued to do that. They've done 2 or 3 more albums since that one. Mm-hmm. And their most recent album, every track they have brought in a vocalist and she sings over, and they have like an alternate version of it that's just the music too. But they've
cool.
added.
I actually haven't listened to that yet. I've listened to the older stuff, and I think the one album after Awake, but I haven't heard that. I got to check that out.
Yeah, what was the one after Awake? I think it was called like Epoch or something. I was super into him for a while, and I still like him a lot. It's a weird song to listen to this week and talk about. Like, it means a lot to me, and I have this very emotional tether to it. But it's not a band or a genre that I listen to as much anymore. But it's so easy to click back into it. I mean, I think for a reason that I mentioned earlier, I listen to this kind of stuff a lot at work, and it's great for that sort of thing. If I'm working on something that I need to focus in on it and I can't listen to a podcast because I can't pay attention to 2 things, I'll switch to stuff like this, sometimes specifically Tycho, and just have that thing.
I have that tie as well with Tycho, and then with a couple other bands that I was considering recommending. But yeah, there's a whole group of synthwave artists and just some people say IDM but EDM or ambient music. The ones that come to mind were like Bonobo, Fortet, Bibio, Burial, stuff like that.
Bibio has a remix on a Tycho album. They did one of their albums. They did a remix album of the same album, and their remix of it is one of my favorite. It's probably my favorite on the album, and I've for years have been trying to get my dad to do a podcast with me about like stuff we were talking about before, kind of religion and spirituality and stuff like that. And if we ever do it, that'll be our intro music. Like, I picked that out like 6 years ago. Awesome. It was like, this will be our podcast theme. Like, it's such a great remix.
That's so good. I got to find that. I haven't heard that.
Yeah, it's great.
That's really cool. I'm going to look for that after this. So another thing I wanted to talk about this song was this song and this artist has been a bridge between me and a lot of people that I meet because there's pop, the stuff that plays on the radio that everybody listens to, which I enjoy some of, absolutely.
Sure.
And then there's a lot, especially here in Austin, there's a lot of people who are into EDM. Dance culture, rave culture, which again, I have participated in and do enjoy. But Tycho has served me as a way to connect with those people and the sort of things that they like because, especially this album was an example that I used before. I was like, oh, you like EDM? And like, for some of these people, that's kind of all they listen to. And I was like, okay, well, check out Tycho, because if I can get you into that, then I can take you to another step in a different direction. So I just think I think it's a really approachable artist. Especially because it's like, it's very calming and kind of centering as well. So I think it's emotionally approachable. It's smooth. It's kind of easy to listen to, and it works really well for like working, like for if you're writing or anything. Did you ever listen to stuff like that working out, or was it more intense stuff when you would work out?
So for like cardio and stuff like that, yeah, sometimes, and a lot of it I think just helped with having this album in particular having a more steady beat. I mean, some of the previous Tycho albums have a lot more like ambient kind of feel to it, where you just feel like you're in a slow motion car crash. But yeah, no, I definitely did at times, like if I was on a treadmill or just walking around the neighborhood or whatever. One other thing I was going to say too, to your exact point in terms of that like kind of soothing, centering thing, is, and it comes as no surprise, you know, doing what I do and also just the interest that I have. But like I've always really resonated with bands and with artists that have a strong visual aesthetic as a component too with their stuff. So whether it's their actual like stage shows or just their like sense of design in general. And this album in particular, all of their stuff, but definitely this one and further, that graphic design sense that he brings to it, where it's this like super minimalistic, clean lined. The previous albums, again, great design, but it's more like floral kind of textures and stuff like that. And then you get to Awake and it's this like very clean cut minimalist stuff. And to me, it feels like you can listen to the music without seeing the album art, obviously, but it's in my head, especially seeing it at the same time. And then not long after this album came out, Amanda and I saw them perform in Indianapolis, and like their stage show is a lot of visual stuff and pulling in design elements from Alejandro Jodorowsky films and like El Topo and stuff, but then mixing it with like the iconography from the band and like those specific color palettes, and it all kind of meshes together for me in a big way. Like I actually do have a form of synesthesia, but it's not the one that everyone thinks is cool, where you see colors and everything. But if I
wait, I didn't know this about you. You have to explain what this, because I'm familiar with the phenomenon. I have how can I say this? I've sort of experienced that when I've been on drugs, tripping specifically. I've kind of done something like that. So what's yours like?
Strange. It's weird. Like, so I'll tell you, I don't mind talking about it. Yeah. I didn't know that it was synesthesia until I was in college, and I didn't know that it was a thing. I just thought it was something weird I did as a kid.
Yeah.
And then I found out that other people did it too, and that it's called linguistic, or what is it? Ordinal linguistic personification. I think I might have some of that wrong. But I see and assign gender with numbers and letters. So,
whoa.
Yeah,
that's so fucking cool. I've never heard of that in my life.
I just thought it when I was a kid. I was just like, oh yeah, 8 is a girl, 4 is a guy. Like, it was just like seeing. I don't know if it was like a Sesame Street Wonder Chosen thing of seeing like the numbers, not Wonder Chosen as a kid, but with like the like googly eyes or whatever. Yeah. And I think as a kid, maybe I thought it was just connected to that. But then as I got older, I was like, no, I can tell you, 1's a guy, 2's a girl, 3's a girl. Yeah, like I know what they are.
Wow.
And then, finding out that that's a thing. And when I was doing the podcast weekly, we had a listener who I'm still friends with to this day, but he was like, I do that too. And we set up a Google document, and we each gendered our alphabets and numbers, and they didn't overlap. Like some of them were different or whatever. Yeah. But we both had the same thing. And I looked it up and was like, oh, it's a form of synesthesia. Like it's a thing.
That is
it's not cool or helpful.
That doesn't sound useful, no, but it's a bizarre thing that now you've shared with our viewers and with me, so that's fucking cool. We need to get more weirdos on here. People like that shit. So okay, anything else you want to say about the song?
I don't think so. I let me see. Let me check my notes really quick. I think that was pretty much it.
I had one like little technical thing for music creators here that I thought was interesting. For large portions of the song, you know, the snare hits on 2 and 4, like the whole song. And for large swaths of the song, every other snare hit is accompanied by both a snap and a clap sound. And I you never hear that. It's just rare for me, because I make electronic music with the drum machine. And I've done snaps and claps in front of a microphone too. but to use all three of them, you know, the snare hit, the clap, and the snap all at the same time, it's like an ultra flam. It's like all tiny little tiny little percussive notes, you know, smashed into one quarter note, and it's a more is more example that in such an understated and smooth song, it doesn't even stand out to most people. That's just kind of nerd shit that I like to pay attention to and listen to. But I thought it was interesting, and I thought it was kind of a bold choice.
Yeah.
Especially to have something like that in a song, and for it still to feel so smooth, but you've got this tiny little, like, it's almost like a pebble in a river. You know, just this tiny little crunch that happens here every once in a while. So
yeah,
I thought that was
makes
pretty interesting.
Total sense.
Yeah.
There's some cool stuff. If people are into the song, I would definitely recommend checking out that Song Exploder episode, because there's one note in one of the main keyboard melodies that he plays a half measure too soon, and he had it in the loop and didn't catch it before they sent it out, and so he was like, I'm going to show it to you now, and you're going to hear it every single time you listen to the song, just like I hear it every single time. There's also a vocal track that's hidden in there that he forgot to turn off. So there's little cool interesting things that they dig into in the Song Exploder episode. The only other thing I was going to say is like kind of a like PS to the story is it's still a song that resonates with me because a handful of years later, I got to a point with my lettering career that I was making enough money to do it full time. And so I ended up quitting my day job a little over 2 years ago. And I'm like, I am a comic book letterer now. Like, that's my job. And the listening to the song immediately transplants me back to that place, but like a spectrum of emotions, which is one of my favorite things about it. So that feeling of like, yes, this is what I think I meant to do. This is what I want to do. But then also like every positive thing with its mirror. So like excitement, but then also a lot of trepidation and confidence, but then extreme imposter syndrome, which are two extremes that I still struggle with, you know, now. Like I'll have days where I'm like, no, I did a good job on this. I'm happy with this work. And I feel like, you know, and having to temper that and be like, you know, you're being too arrogant about it or whatever else. And then maybe later the next day, having a feeling of, at some point today, someone is going to be like, what are you doing here? You should not be working in comics. Like you've tricked us long enough.
Yeah.
And this song like pulls all of those memories back, still fresh with me, of like, but in a beautiful way. We talked about this a little bit before the air. Like, it's easy to talk about life and these experiences as this, like, you know, follow your dreams, and that's obviously a part of it, but also like with that comes all of the hard things in life, and that's what you try to grow through and everything, and that's a beautiful thing ultimately, that you have this spectrum of all that. So this song does hit all of those things for me, which I like. I can remember the fear of, you know, before that, of making the jump, but eventually I did, and now I do it. So
that's incredible, man. And
here we are.
I'm so like overcome with joy that some of my friends have gotten to make that transition, you know, from day job to being an artist, man. That's so incredible. It's something obviously I'm working on too, and I'm going through some of those hard times myself.
Yeah.
And
you'll do it.
You should definitely listen to the next episode that'll be released on YouTube Friday, when this episode goes on Patreon, because Drew Hall says a lot
I'm
of
excited
the same
for it.
shit that you said today, and you're both comic book people. Like he makes comics, you letter, there's a lot of similarities there, and other listeners will catch those too. So it's really interesting that you guys independently had some of these same contexts, because you're both visual artists.
Yeah.
And also dabblers in music. You guys have both had a little bit of a music past too. So, man, that's so cool. I'm just really happy for you, and also glad that you have great taste, and Tycho was the song you picked today, because this shit's really cool.
See, that's what I was nervous about. I'm glad you like it, but I know I'm not intimidated. Well, no, I am. I am intimidated by your musical knowledge. I mean, you were turning me onto bands in high school that I never, you know, would have it was like cheating. I was like 6 levels away from discovering them in my
I'm
lifetime, and you're
power
giving me
leveling you.
the
Yeah.
the warp whistle in Mario to
Yeah.
skip to the 8th world or whatever.
That's that I live for that. So I'm glad, and that's why you're here, is because we got to share those kind of things, and that's what I'm trying to bring to the audience too, is these little connections.
I was definitely tempted to find something way more obscure and try to impress you, but ultimately I was just going to be like, it's because I like the song. That's it. That's the story. I knew I needed to pick something that would have more of a connection. So
well, that's you, and you had a great story here, man. We all love hearing those stories of an artist stretching out, or anybody stretching out beyond what they think is possible for them and making it work. It's inspiring, man. So thank you.
yeah,
Speaking of your work,
it's fun.
before I talk about the song I would like to recommend, I'd like to give you the opportunity to talk about how people can find your work, how people can support you, or at least follow your work.
Sure. I have a website, hopkinsletters.com. And you can see lettering samples on there, design samples. And then I also have a section on the site of comics that I've done myself, specifically writing. They're all like autobiographical comics. One of them is a 2-page goodbye letter that I made and lettered and designed and sent to everybody at my day job when I quit, because like 95% of the people that work there didn't know that I had an entire other like life outside of that corporate setting. And one's about my mom having died and like my family trying to not move on, but be a new family of 4 instead of 5. So there's stuff on there to check out that just might be interesting, even if you don't care about lettering. And then I'm on Twitter at DC_Hopkins. Everything online is DC Hopkins, because there was a David Hopkins in comics already when I started. So that's my name on there. And if you are working in comics and need a comic book lettered, I can do it. So, hit me up, let me know. And then I do I do a weekly podcast. If you're into horror movies, we do a horror movie podcast called Eerie International. And that's at eerieinternational.com. And then the comic book podcast that I mentioned earlier is called Hideous Energy. And that was like, we had a following. It was a weekly show. The more that I started working in comics, the more I was like, oh, I can't really be as candid about stuff as I used to be on here, because like I could potentially be working with these people or whatever. And
yeah, it's tricky.
So it's changed over time, but we still do episodes. We probably put out a handful a year. We do it maybe every couple months or something. And it's fun too, but it's a different show than it used to be. If you go back to the old episodes, it's us being like, this comic sucks for this reason, and this one's great for this reason. And it's a lot more fanboy-y. Yeah, that's it.
That's awesome, man. Thanks for sharing that. Go look for David's stuff. He's a talented, smart guy, really funny, and obviously a very warm, heartfelt, just good dude. And I'm super glad I got to spend some time with him today. And I think we should do this again another time. Maybe you can try to impress me next time. So, like I mentioned earlier, this was a hard one to pick a recommendation for, because it sits in the middle space between genres that I really enjoy, and I don't know somebody that does what Tycho does better. It's just this specific kind of intersection between electronic music, ambient music, and some sort of rock and roll. Because it's still got a lot of analog instruments driving it. So that's where I feel it sits, at least. But so instead of thinking like in terms of genre or maybe like artist, actually no, artist intent is kind of more the angle that I was thinking here, as well as sort of the way the song feels. So the ideas that I went with were the feeling of fullness and aliveness, and the investigative nature of that song. Those are some of the words that resonate with me. That's how it feels to me. So I took that idea and I said, okay, well, I could let's stick with that and go in a direction that I know David likes, which is metal. Okay. So if you like Awake by Tycho and you like any sort of metal or hardcore music, I recommend listening to Dream House by Death Heaven.
Oh, I love that. Already a fan. Oh, damn. Yeah, I know him.
Oh, man. Damn, that's really, okay, well, I'm still recommending it for anybody else.
Great, and great visual aesthetic. That cover is awesome.
Yes, I have that on vinyl. It's so good.
It's great.
So yeah, the reason why I picked it, it's another long song. Awake is like 6 minutes, I think. And then, I think so. And then Dream House is like 9 minutes, but it's a long piece. It's got a couple movements in it. They both definitely feel like a look into the artist's search for meaning into their own creative process. They're both dreamlike, but still very like alive and literally awake. But they both have this kind of airy, ambient quality to them. So if you like Awake by Tycho and you enjoy, or at least can handle thrashy, smashy drums and guitars and screaming vocals, definitely check out Dreamhouse by Death Heaven off their album Sunbather.
Oh yeah.
All right, well, this is a good challenge, man, because you got to come up with something more obscure next time, and then I got to come up with something even more obscure to reference on that. So it was great having you, man. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, man, this was awesome. I love the show. I've been watching the episodes, and if you ever want me to come back on, like you said, I absolutely would love to. It was great talking to you, and also just doing this. It was super fun.
Awesome, man. Yeah, it's good to see you. So for our listeners, thanks for watching. Click like and subscribe. Make sure to find David's stuff. I'm going to include some links when I do post this underneath in the description so that you can easily get to David's things. Click subscribe on the Eraser Studios YouTube channel, please. Click like on this video. You can find us on Instagram at Eraser Studios Music. You can find the link to our Patreon below as well. Please consider becoming a patron and helping me make more of these things and work on a solo album and all sorts of fun stuff. So until next time, thanks for watching.
Bye.